Okay, guys, we are going to be talking about the distributive property today. So, again, distributive property is something you guys have already learned, but it's good to go over and get a good refresher on. I'm just going to do a couple of problems today because, again, it's not too much more complicated than the things you guys have already done. But looking over the distributive property is used when we have parentheses, right? That means we have something multiplying with more than one term inside of a parenthesis, right? So there are a couple ways of doing this. I'm going to show you one way of doing it. In fact, I'm just going to write this problem again because I'm going to show you two ways. This first way I show you works in some situations, but it's not necessarily always the best thing to do, which you'll see in the second problem I do. But the first thing you could do is in a situation where you have a problem like this, where it's a number outside the parenthesis and then a parenthesis and nothing else. There's nothing behind it and there's only one term on this side. One thing you can do that can save you some time is you just start off by dividing the 4. When you divide, you're technically dividing the entire side of the equation. Okay? And so like technically everything here is being divided by 4, but since everything's also being multiplied by 4, it just cancels out. So that's why it can work in this situation. Then you divide that by 4 and get out my trusty calculator. Negative 92 divided by 4 is negative 23. So once there's nothing outside these parentheses, I could just drop it and it'd be 1 plus 4x equals negative 23. Okay? So that's one way of doing it, and then you can just solve this two-step problem here, right? Get rid of the acquaintance by subtracting 1, gives you 4x is equal to negative 24, and then divide by 4, and x is going to end up equaling negative 6, okay? That was a very quick way of doing it, but again, when it's positive, you have to subtract to move it to the other side, and then when you're multiplying, you divide both sides. And that leaves you with your variable and you're done, right? Now, this is the way that I would say you need to kind of look at these problems going forward in math, because as they get more complicated, that dividing trick becomes less and less useful, okay? So this is why it's called the distributive property too, is if this 4 is outside the parenthesis, that means it is multiplying with both terms inside of it. And my lights just went on. There we go. Okay. And so we would distribute that 4 to both terms inside the parenthesis. So 4 times 1 is 4, and 4 times 4 is 16. Equals negative 92. Now it's going to be the same kind of two steps, just different numbers here, right? We're going to start off by moving this 4. It's positive, so we subtract 4 to each side. And that leaves me with 16x is equal to negative 96. And then last step here is we got to move this 16. It's multiplying, so I divide. And x is going to equal, guess what? Negative 96 divided by 16 is going to be negative 6. Same answer, right? Doesn't really change anything. Now, here is a problem that kind of shows why that dividing trick doesn't work. So I have 4 times these numbers in the parentheses, but then I also have subtract 3v over here, right? So if I started off by trying to divide by 4, so if I divide everything by 4 here, and divide this by 4, first of all, that's going to be a decimal right there. And then also this 4 would cancel out, but then I still have this being divided by 4 over here. So while I might get rid of this 4, I'd just basically move the 4 over here. And it's a mess, right? It doesn't work. So that's why I say like the distributing, the more complicated these problems get, the easier it is to stick with the distributing. The dividing trick will be nice to kind of like have you exposed to it when we get to absolute value, because you can't distribute into an absolute value. But for now, let's just think of distributing like this, okay? So we're going to multiply that 4 throughout. 4 times negative 8 is negative 32v. 4 times 2 is 8. And then minus 3v equals 113. Now, next step, and this is generally what we do with multi-step equations, and maybe I should write these steps out here. So when I have multi-step equations, there's 4 general steps I follow. The first step is to distribute, which I did. The second step is to combine like terms. Now this isn't going to come into play today because there's only one variable, or the variable's already on one side, but move the variable to one side. And then the last step, if you do those first 3, generally what's left is just a 2-step equation. So you just solve the party problem. Okay, those are the 4 general steps you kind of try to follow with multi-step equations. Obviously, as problems get more advanced, you might have to look at it a little bit differently, but those are the steps that I generally try to follow when I'm solving a multi-step equation. Okay, so I distributed. Next step is to combine like terms. So I've got a negative 32v and a negative 3v. I'm going to combine those. And it's going to give me 113 equals negative 35v plus 8. Okay, now it's a party problem, right? So I've got a best friend and acquaintance. I'm going to move this acquaintance. He's adding, so I have to subtract 8 to each side. Cancels out there. 113 minus 8 is going to be 105 equals negative 35v. Then you divide by negative 35 to each side. And v is going to equal 105 divided by negative 35 is negative 3. And that is my answer. Okay, not too tough, right? When you got the number in front, you just got to multiply it into the parentheses like that, and then you just follow your steps, and you're done.